Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Brandi Jones, Organizing Director at Secure Families Initiative. And today we are hosting our biweekly briefing to discuss the historic renaming of military institutions in the United States. On April 27th, Fort Lee will become Fort Fregg-Adams during a redesignation ceremony honoring two Black officers. To discuss this and more, we are thrilled to be joined by our special guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel Troy Mosley, and the author of The Armed Forces and the American Social Change: An Unwritten Truce. Troy, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to share a little bit more that, people can have an idea of your career. You're a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who grew up in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, attended Florida State University, and commissioned through FAMU's ROTC program, and then went on to serve 20 years in the Army. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share, what was your favorite assignment while you were serving?
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Brandi. It's hard to narrow just one assignment. I have a handful that I have fond memories from. An officer only gets a few times to command, so my company command at Fort Benning was very special to me, and I will always remember that. And the soldiers I served with, the relationships that we formed. So that definitely is prominent in my professional um, history. Serving as an XO for the 212th, the last mobile Army surgical hospital, just like the
Wow.
old TV show. We did deploy to Afghanistan, and that also forged special memories in my mind. We did some really good work to save life and limb for not only our service members, but for Iraqi civilians that were caught in the crossfire and suffered collateral damage. So that was noteworthy. And I had an opportunity to go to uh, what they call continuing education or advanced civil schooling. Was selected to get a master's in healthcare administration at Baylor University in Waco. Had good memories of that. A lot of good family time. Just able to spend a lot more time with my kids, picking them up from school regularly, like every day. That was unique and special, and I'm grateful that my service selected me for that opportunity, and it gave our family a little respite from the continuous high op tempo that you all know so well.
Yes, very, very much so. I love that, Troy. Spending time with our family is so important.
Yes, it is.
What inspired you? I mentioned you have your book. I have it here, The Unwritten Truce. What inspired you to write this amazing story?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's just kind of my life story. I'm a child of the, you know, 70s and 80s. My formative years from grade school through high school were in the 70s and 80s. And my own father was a Vietnam era veteran, got
Um,
out as a captain. And at that time, America had just passed the last piece of civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which ended racial covenants in housing. And, I talk about this in my book. The military played a prominent role in shaping that legislation, which some historians will argue is some of the most meaningful legislation in the history of our nation to make the specified founding documents of all men and women are created equal under the law a reality. That legislation ended the practice of redlining and discrimination. And what many people lose sight of is it wasn't just Black Americans, it was Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish people, could not live wherever, they wanted. And my father was a benefactor, or my family was a benefactor of that, because when he left the Army, he was recruited into a management training program with AT&T, and they were also under, court-ordered pressure to diversify the upper ranks of management. And the military, having desegregated in 1948, had a huge head start on corporate America in terms of bringing in minorities that were college educated, that had been through the service academies or various ROTC programs, that not only had the educational credentials, but the practical leadership experience of, leading personnel. So he was part of that first cohort of Black and brown managers that integrated corporate America.
Wow. Oh, that's such a touching story. You really followed in your father's footsteps in a lot of ways.
Yes, and my mother was a school teacher. She's retired now, and so she was a strong proponent of reading. And I grew up with a lot of books. And when it was rainy or I couldn't go outside, I'd just like pick up an encyclopedia and just start reading. And that was my first introduction to the Civil War, and it was kind of serendipitous. When my family was moving, my dad exited the service at Fort Benning, and he went to Atlanta where they had AT&T Bell South headquarters. And my mom and I were in Jacksonville, and we were flying to Atlanta to look at houses. And so, rambunctious, 7-year-old kid, I'm darting in and out of, concourses and gift shops. And I stumbled upon this hat. It was a Confederate patrol cap. They had a, Union Army hat and the Confederate one. And I was familiar with the American flag in the blue, so it wasn't novel, But this gray one, I'm like, hey, this is different. So I put it on. I have like a toy horse broomstick, and I'm galloping around the gift shop. And my mom sees me, and she's like, oh my gosh, she's like, take that off. Here, sit down, read a book. And and she didn't really scold me, but I knew the sternness and the expression of her. I had reached some protocol that was pretty serious. So when we get back home, I'm like, hey, Mom, why did you take that hat off me and everything? And she's like, well, that hat was worn by people that fought to keep Black people enslaved. And it was like mind blown. At that point in my life, I never knew that America fought a civil war. I never knew that Black people were enslaved in this country. So I started to do my own research, went to the encyclopedia, started reading in it. And it was like just a life-changing experience. I felt a sense of shame. I'm like, here I am, gallivanting around this gift store with, symbols of my own oppression. I didn't have those words then, but no one had to tell me, what that was like. Probably my only real reference to slavery was the old Ten Commandments movie that comes on every Easter, where the Israelites are freed from slavery through Moses, and so that they were poor, they didn't have much of anything, and that's not a state that intuitively one would be proud of. And it was through years later I would learn that they had courage, they had resiliency. They were not slaves, they were enslaved. They were people that were brought from Africa, farmers, healers, men of faith, midwives, and such. And all of that, doesn't really get taught. But I just felt a compulsion that this was my family story that I wanted to share. I also knew it was America's story.
It was America's story.
Millions of Americans' plight is similar to my own, and I just wanted to speak that truth in the book.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we were wanting to discuss more about the renaming of the bases, and your story ties in so well. I wanted to share with our guests today more about the background of Fort Lee becoming Fort Fregg-Adams. So during a redesignation ceremony scheduled for this week on the 27th, the base will be named after General Arthur Gregg, who rose from the rank of private to three-star general during his military logistics career, which began just after World War II and spanned nearly 36 years. Gregg is now 94 years old and will be the only living person in modern Army history to have an installation named after him, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams. She was the first Black officer in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which later became known as the Women's Army Corps in World War II, and led a predominantly Black unit while serving overseas. These stories are just so amazing to me, and the history of the people who this installation will be renamed. Can you tell us more, Troy, about your thoughts on this historic day?
So aptly stated, Brandi. I mean, this is a milestone achievement, and I think we understand that representation matters, and societies celebrate those traditions that we want to see emulated and repeated. And I think for many decades, the military kind of operated under a mandate to first and foremostly win our nation's wars. But then secondarily, there was this unwritten commitment to preserving the social status quo. The military, and you can read various documents, even said that, during World War One, in the early turn of the 20th century, and even up to World War II, did not want to outpace society's evolution with respect to equality. And so, following the Civil War, the military wanted to unify the country, and they made overtures to do this by naming institutions, bases, after the former Confederates in the spirit of reintegration. So fast forward to the early 20th century, where we're fighting world wars and we have complete national, not globalization, but just the entire country rallying behind a war effort. And it took Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, women doing their things within, at that time, narrow confines of, delivering mail, sorting mail, radio and communications, flying planes that were built from the factory to the ports to be shipped. Some of the women that did have pilot's license. But that, entire national effort was galvanized by bringing all of its people together, and the resources that were used to fund the creation of ships and planes were all Americans bought war bonds. And some of the pushback from minority Americans were like, we don't enjoy having our men and women trained at bases that were named for people that fought against the United States. So, the military kind of came to see that this was an awkward juxtaposition when we're teaching our troops the value of honor, courage, duty, country, but at the same time, we are elevating and celebrating a tradition of men that were contrary to those values. And I think the other thing that's important to know is that, like many achievements in America, this effort to rename our bases was forged during the George Floyd moment of racial reconciliation, that inflection point during the summer of 2020 with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And I held a rally in Black Lives Matter Plaza in July of 2020 to celebrate the integration of the armed forces. And I had guest speakers come and speak to this tradition and how it created external outward pressure on, corporate America and other institutions to follow suit. And it was in that moment where constant pressure from groups like me and other speakers that could see the misalignment of values, Congress had the time to reflect among this misalignment. And in July of 2021, they wrote the National Defense Authorization Act,
Yeah.
which funds, the operation of the military every year. And they specified that all of the service would remove any type of honorifics to men that fought against the United States. So that was the legal footing that started these changes.
And I want to say thank you for your efforts in organizing. We share that with our audience, how important it is to organize, and also as military families, call your congressman, we like to say, and and what a difference this has made. And like you stated, this all came about, which will end up being 9 Army installations will be redesignated. And this is in accordance with, as you spoke of, the Department of Defense endorsing the renaming based on the work from the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. So thank you so much for sharing that background. I did read recently in an article that had a speech by Major General Mark Smearley, which said the renaming he felt was inspirational to soldiers and civilians who serve on our Army posts and the communities who support them, that they delivered exactly that with these new renamings from this specific installation by 2 very inspirational leaders, and that it was that their accomplishments from World War II were tremendous. And it really speaks to the important history of the installation and to the courage and dignity and devotion to the duty that the Army strives for in every soldier. So I wanted to ask, do you feel that this will inspire the renaming this week, will inspire others, and how so?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I think absolutely it will make a difference. I know that in this moment in time, the services are challenged with labor markets that have very low unemployment. And in these times, it's very difficult for them to meet their retention and recruitment goals because there's so many options for individuals in terms of where do they want to work. And work is more than just a job. We get a sense of satisfaction. It's part of who we are. We derive feelings of self-esteem, and for many people, it's difficult to envision yourself serving in an organization that celebrates a tradition of racial hatred, of bigotry, of gender inequality. And the renaming celebrates the traditions of all Americans from all walks of life. Fort Rucker is going to be renamed for Lieutenant Colonel, or a full colonel, of Native American heritage. And he's also a Vietnam era and Korean War veteran. We have bases that are being renamed for women, where it's not just lip service, where we say we're a values-based organization. What we say is now actually being reflected demonstrably in our institutions. And representation is important because when you see someone who looks like yourself that has sacrificed and their sacrifice is honored, that tugs on those, strings of patriotism that we all, by virtue of our citizenry, want to celebrate.
I feel like I'm tearing up a little hearing you talk about that. That was so touching, Troy. Hearing the different bases and who they'll be renamed after, and just wanting to be sure that everyone has representation and a voice, because everyone has served and serves in our armed forces. It's so important that we highlight that.
Absolutely.
I have one last question. A lot of people in our audience, they would like to be advocates. And I just wondered if you had any words of wisdom for those out there that want to be, more involved in their community and issues, especially of this nature when it comes to inclusion and
Right.
representation.
That's really the question, the $10,000 question. How do we engage the system to affect positive change? My best advice is to find a technique that is sustainable for you. For some people who are not very outgoing, that are not going to knock on doors or whatever, maybe making phone calls, working in a phone bank to register voters or make voters aware of issues, writing your elected officials is important to let them know what is important to you, what are you dissatisfied for. One of the initiatives that I'm starting to get involved with is the restoring the ban to semi-automatic weapons and gun violence in schools. I am a gun owner. I have many guns. They're not many, too. They're for home protection, and I keep them in my home. So I think that this movement to have everyone carrying arms in open public spaces does not make us more safe. It makes us more likely that someone's going to lose their temper in a given moment and possibly use deadly force out of a fit of anger or the inability to control oneself. So my position is kind of, yes, I honor the Second Amendment. Keep your guns, keep them at home. If the Russians attack us and parachute in, okay, everybody grab your weapon and defend your country. But short of that, I don't think people should be walking around with guns. It makes the police job harder to do. If they encounter a situation and there are multiple people, who's the bad guy? I mean, people don't walk around with shirts announcing, I am the bad guy. So it just complicates things for that perspective. But what we're going to focus on specifically are the automatic weapons. These are the weapons that we see in the news are used repeatedly in mass shootings in schools. And it wasn't always the case that you could own the weapon that our service members take to war. And I would submit a weapon so powerful that can hold hundreds of policemen at bay probably shouldn't be in the common public spaces. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I like how you're shared. It's about, making sure we're voicing our, concerns. We're making sure we're sharing with our members who are in positions to make decisions, our concerns, not being worried to speak and voice what you believe and how it affects you personally and your community. I think those are a lot of the same advocacies that we say here at Secure Families Initiative as well. And we also like to say, these are policies that affect our military families even more sometimes because decisions of war and peace fall directly within our lives. And so I like that you're encouraging others to always speak up and join organizations and organize around the issues that affect you and your community. I think I have one question from the audience. Have you ever seen or heard backlash from those who do not want the base names changed? And if so, has the military tried to persuade and change hearts and minds?
Great question. There has been, pushback and, very vocal opposition to the renaming effort. And I think that change is difficult. And this is a significant change from, what has existed for about 70 years. These bases were built between 1915 and 1942. All of the ones, they're all in the Deep South, the former Confederacy. And again, it was a way to kind of appease Southerners. So the Base Renaming Commission was very thoughtful about which people that they chose to honor, and they wanted to make it regionally specific. For example, in Fort Benning, it's being renamed for the colonel whose name escapes me right now. I apologize. That was the main protagonist for the movie that Mel Gibson made famous, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. So that base is being renamed for he and his wife, that his unit deployed from Fort Benning early Vietnam. And, you know, he made many sacrifices, and so did his men. And certainly his contributions and his efforts are something that everyone can celebrate, not just the people whose great forefathers fought for the Confederacy. So I think, the naming commission did a good job. I think the PR campaign behind why this is important is good. And, if people have open minds, we can have thoughtful conversations about, my great grandfather fought for the Confederacy, and I think we're, trying to change history. You can't rechange history. What happened happened. But what we can change is who within history that we want to honor.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I mean, I grew up in California, and as a spouse, we did have our first PCS to North Carolina, and that was very eye-opening. That was the first time for me that I saw the Confederate statues and installations named, and I was so confused. And I remember later moving to Virginia and our children attending school and being asked to attend reenactments of the Confederacy, and being asked for that reenactment to come to their school and have the children, like you discussed, wear materials and things of this unit. And I was so surprised. And so for me, this is kind of a day I even never thought I would see, because that wasn't that long ago when we were stationed in those areas. And I'm just really grateful that you came and you shared with us today from your background. And I just want to close in saying that we're so thankful for you joining us today. And your story is very inspirational, Troy. And we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on this historic event. And I believe that maybe you'll be in attendance. Is this?
Yes, I absolutely will be in attendance. I am one of about 1,000 people that got invitations to the ceremony. So I will share photos with you and anecdotes. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm Mosley_TR. You can see a lot of the work that I've done and groups that I'm affiliated with have done. One of my colleagues, Ty Siegele, actually, I was able to get him on the committee that visited the bases and made the recommendations to the Secretary of Defense. Ty's a retired brigadier general, a former professor emeritus of history at West Point. He's absolutely the right person to do that. And he has a book out entitled Robert E. Lee and Me, A Southerner's Reconciliation with the Legacy of the Confederacy. That's also very good if you have some readers out there that like to read and learn more about that history. But I will be there, and I'm looking forward to a celebration of our values as a service.
I love it. And we'll love to share those photos, Troy. Yes. Thank you again so much for joining us today. It was absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Brandi. You all keep up the strong work you do for your communities and supporting your military spouses. And God bless you.
Thank you.